Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar titled Moving to the Cloud. Next slide, please. I'll be your host and moderator today. My name is Mark Carl. I'm the Chief Security Officer at PDI. Next slide, please. Just want to run through a little housekeeping here really quickly. This is our agenda for today. Next slide. The webinar is being recorded. Will be made available on Conexxus365.org. For participants today, you can ask questions via the webinar interface. There's a Q&A section there. Make sure you get those questions in early, and at the end of the webinar today, we'll be taking some questions, time permitting. So our webinars may be used toward PCI continuing education credits. And so if you're interested in that, reach out to some of the Conexxus staff or to myself or others in chair positions at Conexxus. So a quick disclaimer here. Of course, attorneys make us put this slide in. The views that are presented today are the opinions solely of the speakers. Next slide, please. A huge thank you and shout out to our 22 annual Diamond sponsors at Conexxus. This extra support is really appreciated by Conexxus. Allows us to continue the work that we do on behalf of the industry. Next slide, please. A little bit about Conexxus. We are an independent nonprofit member-driven technology organization. A lot of words there, but that is what we do. We set standards for data exchange, security, mobile commerce, among other things. We provide vision to the broader petroleum industry, identify emerging techs and trends that may be coming about, and of course, we advocate for our industry through technology and policy. A little bit about Conexxus365. It is a weekly education subscription series. If you're not subscribed, then we would recommend you do that. Lots of great webinars. Just had a really good one on the reality of synthetic identity fraud, which was very interesting. It's an emerging threat that's out there to retailers that all retailers really need to understand and know about. Next slide, please. All right. A little bit about our presenters here today. Both of these fellows I know pretty well. Simon Gamble from Mako Networks. I met Simon when he first came to the U.S. To set up the first Mako office here in the U.S., and we became friends then. And while we actually compete in the market, we've actually done a lot of collaborative things over the years as well. Simon's a good friend, but more importantly, Simon really understands IT and networking very, very well as data security and cybersecurity. And of course, all of us these days do a lot of implementation in DevOps in cloud environments. And Simon at Mako has really embraced cloud. They've done a lot of great things with the product in the cloud. And so he's very well versed on this particular topic, and appreciate him coming to the table to bring this presentation to us today along with Matt. Matt Bradley. Matt's been working alongside me for a number of years now. We acquired Matt's company that he worked for back in 2015, SmartLink, from the Heartland Payments Systems company. And Matt's been key in a lot of the engineering within previously ControlScan and now at PDI in network engineering, and more recently cloud ops. And so when we decided to move a lot of our stuff from colo facilities into the cloud, Matt was pretty instrumental in that as well. So two people here very well versed in the topics that we're talking about today, moving stuff to the cloud and how to make sure that you're not losing sight of security as you do that. And so with that, Simon, I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Mark. What a wonderful introduction. Appreciate it. So today, Matt and I are going to be talking about moving to the cloud. A lot of folks listening to this webinar will be considering moving some of their applications or services into the cloud. And our goal today isn't to tell you how to do that, but it's to tell you some of the dangers you might want to consider, some of the really great advantages to doing it that you might want to consider. And we're going to give you some real-world examples of things you might be considering moving to the cloud, and the things you have to really seriously think about to make sure that the cloud is going to be the right move for you. So today we're going to cover off the topics that are up on the screen. And again, the goal is to really give you some things to think about, give you the benefit of some of Matt and my experiences in migrating systems to the cloud. And it really doesn't matter whether it's a small system, a part of one of your stores, or a huge piece of application infrastructure that you're looking at moving to the cloud. They all need the same considerations before pulling the trigger. Matt, is there anything you'd like to add before we leap into our presentation?
No, I think we're ready. Let's get going, Simon.
Okay. Matt, why don't you handle this one first? What is the cloud? It's such a generic term, and I'm sure a lot of people think it's one thing and it's really another, or really only have half the picture. So what do you think the cloud is?
Well, I like to think of the cloud as services that you may have or currently host yourself, and you're transitioning that service to another provider. Conceptually, that provider is hosting your application or service and granting or providing access to it over the internet. They're providing you hardware, they may be providing you applications, but as you state here, it's clearly somebody else's data center, somebody else's equipment. But,
yeah, exactly. And it could be one of the more commonly known cloud providers like Google, Amazon, or Microsoft, or it could be a much smaller provider. The cloud is a pretty generic term, and I think for the sake of this presentation, if we consider the cloud moving your equipment from somewhere that you're responsible for everything into someone else's environment, and it might be spread across multiple data centers, or the cloud just might be spread across one or two, depending on the cloud provider you're using. What do you think about that, Matt?
And more so, not more than just one data center, but globally. It gives you access to provide your services around the world.
Exactly. Yeah, there's some significant benefits to it, and we're going to cover them off as we go through things. But for the sake of this, let's consider that it's someone else's environment, and that's obviously going to bring some things that you need to be thinking about. So what are the benefits of moving to the cloud? I think there's some pretty obvious ones listed here, that moving your systems into someone else's data center means the obvious hosting issues become someone else's problem. It's their responsibility to cool the equipment. It's their responsibility to power the equipment. It's their responsibility to provide a solid internet connection for the equipment. And a lot of people struggle to do that, particularly if they're running it on actual servers in a server room in their head office or back office environment. But there's other things that can bring benefits as well. Matt, why don't you explain a bit about the non-physical hosting benefits that the cloud can bring?
Sure, Simon. Clearly, one of the biggest pain points that you as a provider experience are maintaining your software updates, keeping your systems up to date, free from vulnerabilities. Some elements of that process then get shifted over to the cloud provider. So it's one less thing you need to worry about. Physical security is certainly top of mind. The provider is going to be responsible for a large portion of that. You no longer have to worry about who's touching your equipment, who has access to your equipment.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases, when you're moving to the cloud, it's not really like for like, is it? You're not moving one server into someone else's, or the applications that are on one server onto another equivalent server in someone else's data center. With modern day virtualization, it can be spread across multiple machines, which adds complexity, but also a lot of resiliency to be able to access your applications. The physical security component, if you've got a server room, which is basically a spare cupboard that anyone can walk into in your office, having it in a proper hosted location where no one or almost no one can get physical access to the equipment is a huge upgrade for you as well. So there's some significant benefits to think about when moving things to the cloud. And there's different aspects of what the cloud entails and what you'll be paying for. And we're going to cover that off a little bit later on. So bear with us. We're going to try and explain a bit more about the cloud. But to start off with, I think knowing some of the benefits are pretty key. I also think it's important to really think things through about why wouldn't you want to move to the cloud? And one of the biggest things is you're no longer in total control. If you're running your equipment, yeah, you're responsible for some things that we've covered off on that you no longer have to worry about, but someone else is. And are they going to pay as much attention as you and your team would? And a lot of that's going to come down to SLAs and who the cloud provider is, and whether or not you actually trust them to do as good, if not a better job than what you and your team can do. And obviously it's not only the hosting that they're responsible for that you no longer are in control of, but in a lot of cases, it's the security. You do have control over who has access to your server room. You do have control over who has login credentials and access to the applications and the services running on your servers. And you need to make sure that the cloud provider, if they're responsible for those, are doing as good a job as you want them to do. What do you think, Matt? Is there any other reasons why not? I know cloud expertise is obviously pretty important. It's not all about absolving yourself of responsibility, is it?
Yeah, Simon, thank you. I would like to make it clear that moving to the cloud doesn't mean that somebody else is handling all of my, services. You will want somebody who has some expertise in this cloud infrastructure. And that may be somebody on your staff, that may be somebody that you outsource. There are companies out there that can provide you services to help you get to the cloud, but it's not a push to the cloud and then I'm done and it's super easy. So there's something to consider here.
Yeah, I think so too. Keyword here to me is responsibility. And you just like PCR, you can't absolve yourself of responsibility for your applications and equipment if you're moving to the cloud. So certainly my strong advice is don't think this is a way to take a load off your plate. It's a way to add significant benefits, but it doesn't absolve you of responsibility. There's a great seg into our next slide. And Matt, I know you're really hot on responsibility as well as people considering what it is they're moving to the cloud.
It's important to keep in mind that as you move to the cloud, there are varying degrees of services available in the cloud. And with each of those differing levels, there are different levels of responsibility as to who manages what. You'll want to look at the cloud providers' literature, supporting documentation, et cetera, to figure out what are they taking on and what do you still own, because it can change based on what you're purchasing from them.
Yeah, and why don't you explain the difference between those three acronyms that are written at the bottom? I'm sure a lot of people are wondering what on earth they mean, but they're really important when considering what you're moving to the cloud.
Sure. So IaaS is infrastructure as a service. That's really them providing you the tin to run your own network. So they'll give you the servers and the routers, et cetera, and the network. But you really manage everything up above that, including updates, user identities, et cetera. Platform as a service is kind of a stepping stone where they give you an environment for you to develop applications that you'll then host, as a service. And they take a little bit more responsibility in that because they're controlling the development infrastructure. And then the last is SaaS, software as a service, which is really a fully cooked software service that you're purchasing from them. You have very little control over everything other than user identities, access, et cetera. Think of Cloud 365, Office 365, Google Cloud, et cetera, applications that are already cooked that you're just using. They just happen to be hosted in the cloud.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are really, when they think of cloud, think of SaaS. But it's important to realize there's more than one option available to you, and it really is a shift of responsibility curve, or straight line, as you can see in the diagram over there. So really consider what you're moving and what you're paying for, and what you're absolving yourself of responsibility for, and what you're retaining. So let's talk a little bit about some of the pain points that you can remove from your environment when you move to the cloud. As we've already mentioned, physical responsibility for hosting is a big one for a lot of people. If they're used to running equipment in their own server rooms, the removal of responsibility for the physical hosting is a big one, and that also means responsibility for the hardware as well. A lot of people are running applications and services on some pretty old tin that really needs to be upgraded. The hardware, the operating systems, the cooling, the internet access, the physical access, all that stuff can go away with migrating to the cloud, and you're getting an organization, hopefully, that does this because they're doing it for a living. They've got much better buying power and capability than you would for keeping that equipment up, running, modern, updated, etc. You can add an element of disaster recovery capability that you might not have in your own building. COVID's really woken a lot of people up to, what happens if we can't get access to our building, or the people we need to have access to the building can't anymore. Moving things to the cloud can deliver a huge element of disaster recovery to your organization. And that could be disaster recovery for your voice system. It could be disaster recovery for your DVR system. Any of the services and functionality that your business really relies on, moving to the cloud can make it much more easily accessible to you, and you can keep on doing business should bad things happen. Remote application access security can be vastly improved, and we're going to talk about that in some of the examples that Matt and I discuss later on in the presentation. But if you're remotely accessing systems like a back office PC or an ATG or a DVR system straight into your stores, then moving some of that functionality to the cloud can reduce a huge amount of security exposure that you've left open. And then depending on what stuff you're moving to the cloud, it can provide much better access control for manipulating the servers and the services that you've moved to the cloud as well. Matt, why don't you talk a bit about the application and OS updating stuff, because that also is really, really important, and a lot of people forget about it and find it a real burden to keep things up to date.
Sure. It depends on what service you're procuring from the provider as far as who's responsible for what updates. But for a lot of the service offerings, they're managing the operating system updates. They're keeping the system secure through updates, and functionality is improved through updates. Applications, a lot of times you're hosting your own application in the cloud. Well, that means you're still responsible for updating the application, but something to keep in mind.
Yep. Go back to those three acronyms that we had there: the infrastructure, the software as a service at the other end. A lot of that, what you're buying is going to depend on who's responsible for upkeeping what. There are also some pain points added when moving to the cloud that you really need to consider. It's not all plain sailing. You really need to audit and maintain security yourself, or make sure that the service provider that's providing the cloud services is doing what the brochure says. Oftentimes there's a gap between the sales literature and reality, and you owe it to yourself and your business to be able to audit and make sure that they're doing what they say they're doing. There's also support considerations that you need to think about. How easy is it for you to now update bits and pieces that used to be very simple for you to do? It might be more difficult to manage your apps and your operating systems than it was before when you were in total control. So really think through the support considerations, and consider, is it going to add a huge amount of burden for you to look after things? Do you always have to pick up the phone to make any changes versus being able to do things yourself with your own teams? And that really flows on to administration responsibility too. Who's depending on what service you're doing, who's looking after the operating system? Who's removing users when they leave your business? Who's restricting what sort of control people have? Do people within the cloud organization have access to your systems that you need to be concerned about? Could an employee in the cloud company go rogue and really mess up your business? What controls are in place for that? I've kind of dominated the slide, Matt. Is there anything you'd like to add or talk about?
Yeah,
what do you think about it?
I'd like to touch on the auditing and monitoring the security. I think it's important that you as a business either have a team that is keeping an eye on the cloud environment itself, or you're relying on a trusted party to do that for you. I don't think you can just put your systems in the cloud and believe that they're secure and don't need to monitor it. I really think you need to keep an active eye on it and be engaged in the process.
Yeah, we keep coming back to responsibility, don't we? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. You're not throwing this over the fence. So what have you got to consider? A little bit of a summary here. Why are you really migrating services to the cloud? Are you doing it because it's a buzzword and someone's told you should, or are you doing it to really improve things for your business? Are you doing it because you think it's going to be a huge burden removed? Really consider, is it? You've still got it. There's still a lot of responsibilities that you've got to consider when migrating, and really think about what you're migrating. We're going to give three pretty basic examples later on of things that Petro and C-Store folks often want to migrate to the cloud. But there's so many things that we don't have time to cover off on today. So really think about what you're migrating and why you're really doing it. And assess the pros and cons. I mean, Matt, there's so many, it's like that earlier slide. There's a balancing act here, isn't there, with moving things to the cloud? It's not just, yes, you should do it.
Absolutely, Simon. And I'm curious, in your mind, do you see customers moving to the cloud to de-scope for PCI, or are they moving non-payments related services to the cloud?
So what I don't see much de-scoping cloud maneuvering. The Petro C-Store customers that we deal with are typically part of a larger brand, and the payments environment is really out of their ability to move. It's part of the offering that a larger brand delivers to their stores. So I don't see much of that. Most of the migration that I see are back office components moving to the cloud, and then we often get asked for advice for moving things out of a head office environment. Today's examples are more about moving things out of the stores environment that we're going to talk about later on. Your experience may be different in terms of payment stuff, but we see that as pretty tightly controlled by a brand.
Thank you. Yes, I do see it on the payment side, mostly on the back end, but I would agree with you. Most of it does, for the merchant level, it appears to be mostly non-payments related, moving to the cloud.
Yep. So a couple of other points we touch on here. Ensure security isn't weakened. I mean, this sounds abundantly obvious, but hopefully with some of the things we've spoken about before, with responsibility in mind, just make sure that the cloud provider is doing what you want and what you expect. And look around different cloud providers too. They all have pros and cons themselves. Some of them are a lot easier to work with and have a lot more flexibility and everything from operating system availability and IP addressing availability, but they may or may not have some holes in security. So really consider that the security is, you're not you're not exchanging security for convenience. I think that's something that I do see a lot of, and we'll talk about it in at least one of the examples is don't exchange security entirely for convenience. It's a bad idea, and terrible things can happen as a result. And lastly, I think about the connectivity. It's highly likely that the connectivity from moving to the cloud is going to be better than your server room. It's certainly going to be more resilient, but just make sure of that. What sort of connectivity are you paying for? Is it going to get throttled after a certain amount of use? Are you going to get a colossal bill for throughput if something goes wrong and there's an awful lot more transactions or data flow in and out of the cloud provider's environment than you were expecting? So think about this connectivity in terms of its quality, but also in terms of how much it's going to cost you. The last thing you want is bill shock.
Yes, I've seen cases where a software update got hung and just repeatedly requested data and really chewed up the utilization.
Yeah, it can be a big issue. It can be a big issue. So hopefully Matt and I have given you some things to think about so far. Again, going to use the R word, responsibility is key here. And you can only be responsible if you research and understand what it is you're moving and why you're moving it and all the implications involved. Now, hopefully by giving 3 more specific, but we've tried to keep them pretty generalistic examples here of things you might be considering moving to the cloud, or you might have a desire to move to the cloud. We're going to talk through the reasons for and against moving these 3 devices or 3 functions to the cloud. So we see pretty commonly people wanting to move the back office PC functionality to the cloud. From a networking perspective, the way a back office PC works in a gas station, to me, feels kind of antiquated. And to a lot of dealers, they see the same thing. They want to move it to the cloud and be able to not have to physically be in a store or to have to form a VPN to access that back office PC to get information. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the security camera system at stores too. The reason we're talking about that is a lot of people have a massive security hole open on purpose, but perhaps without realizing the dangers involved. And moving to the cloud with your DVR system can be a great thing and can really improve your security. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the ATGs, the old covered in dust things that monitor your underground fuel tanks. That the information they provide is really valuable, and it's important to be able to get access to it yourself and for third parties you might be contracting. So we're going to talk a bit about those as well. So without further ado, let's talk about moving the back office functionality. It's something we see all the time. I'm sure you do as well, Matt. It's something people want to get out of the store, or at least be able to access it remotely often. And it's not as simple as it might seem. So here's a pretty generic store diagram, and you can see the back office PC has got a red square around it. And people want access to it, not just from within the store. But I think it's really important to consider data flow and communications when moving things to the cloud. So it's not as simple as just, hey, let's move this PC to the cloud. We can put a virtual PC in the cloud and we can access that from anywhere we feel like, and it's going to give us a huge amount of flexibility. You really need to think about not only how easy is it to move the device to the cloud, but what's it communicating with and what's it doing? I mean, this device is talking to the point of sale environment, isn't it, Matt? And that's something that people really need to consider.
Absolutely. We're gathering a lot of important information from that point of sale system.
Yeah, exactly. And that system that it has access to is in the cardholder data environment. So maybe having that back office PC in the store adds a huge element of physical security, because it has to be in the store to access that point of sale system. And there's no point in moving it to the cloud if it can't access that point of sale system. So first thing to consider, whether it's the back office PC or something else, is does it have any communication requirements to other areas of the network that you really need to think about? Because in terms of PCI, If it's reaching into that network, there's some serious considerations. There's even more if you have software on the point of sale environment that's proactively pushing out to the back office PC or something else. That's an even bigger issue for a lot of organizations. So think about where a device is communicating. But hey, let's move it to the cloud. Let's see what the sort of things we have to think through here. So you might decide just to have a single back office PC virtualized in a cloud provider's environment that you can access from anywhere. It means you can get into that. You're not having to work out how to remote into that store network, which brings its own problems. You're connecting to the back office PC in someone else's cloud. So, hey, on the surface, this looks pretty secure. But don't forget, it's got to talk to the point of sale environment. I would argue that having a cloud system being able to reach into the point of sale environment brings some more security risks than you might want to take on. And if you're flying a major brand's flag, the chances are very high that they have control over the point of sale environment, and you cannot do this regardless. Now, there are ways around it. There are ways to make it work in a more secure manner. The point of this pretty simple example is just because you can move something to the cloud doesn't mean it's going to work properly from the cloud. You need to consider the boundaries that the oil brand, the fuel brand has placed on your environment and the controls they have that are really designed for everybody's benefit. But particularly if the stuff you're moving to the cloud needs access to or from your point of sale environment, there's some very real things you need to consider here. And certainly if you're putting a device in the cloud that's reaching into or out from the point of sale environment, you need to consider how that traffic flows, preferably over some sort of VPN. But you really need to make sure that cloud environment is PCI compliant in its own right. And most of them are not, or put the burden entirely on you. Have you got anything you want to add about this, Matt? Again, I've kind of dominated this. And
I think it goes back to that responsibility. A lot of the cloud providers will say, I am responsible for A, B, and C, but you are responsible for everything else. So achieving PCI compliance may be possible, but it's going to involve some level of effort on your end in the cloud as well.
Exactly. And can really seriously consider what's being accessed from where when calculating whether or not you want to do this. So let's have a chat about moving your DVR or your CCTV system. A lot of people want to do this, and a lot of people should consider doing this, or at least consider changing how they're accessing their DVR. So more often than not, the CCTV system is sitting in the back office network, and it usually consists of multiple devices. There's usually cameras. If they're modern, they're IP based. If they're older, they might be using coax and some sort of RF communication over the coax. And then they typically send their data feeds back to a centralized for the stores DVR system, and you can see what's going on in your store. Great, handy. And what most folks do is they'll have a firewall rule that allows access to that DVR system from outside the store. And most people want to access it from outside the store from their phones or from their laptops or from wherever they are. There's no restrictions as to where they access it, which means they end up having a firewall rule open that lets anybody have access to the DVR system. And it's super easy to scan networks or scan the internet for open firewall pinholes and find DVRs. Most of them don't have their default passwords changed. And that means not only is it convenient for you to access your DVR system, it's convenient for anybody who wants to case your store without actually being there, have access to the DVR system. And Matt, I don't know about you, but we see this all day, every day with customers and their DVR systems wide open.
Absolutely. And we always try to encourage them to restrict the permitted IP addresses to known ranges or something that they control themselves, but we know that that's not possible. Given that end user could be anywhere on the internet.
Exactly. Yeah, it's particularly if people want to access it from their phones. They might think that's not practical. We try and encourage people to use software VPNs on their phones rather than access the DVR, but sometimes that's not convenient for them if they're not particularly IT literate, or they have a bunch of people that need access to it, and some of them find it difficult to form a VPN. So how might you move this to the cloud and improve security and improve functionality? Well, there's lots of online DVR cloud services that effectively place the website for viewing your DVR system into the cloud. It's off your network. You're no longer accessing your network to get access to your DVR. You're accessing an online service that hopefully is an awful lot more secure than the super cheap DVR system with all sorts of backdoor holes in it that most people are using these days. But you got to remember, the DVR has now got to send its video to that cloud service. So there's data costs to that. Do you want that video service to be streaming out to the cloud 24/7? That might be fine on your flat rate broadband, but what happens when your store broadband dies for a few hours and it goes on to cellular? Do you want that DVR system to still stream its video over cellular, or do you want it to go offline? There's usually a happy medium you can do here in terms of cameras stream to a box in store, box in store streams to the cloud, and the box in the store can cache the video and send it up to the cloud only when it's using broadband. So think about all these things as well. What's the data cost of moving that video into the cloud? There's going to be a huge convenience uptick in moving that to the cloud, a big security boost, but there's a data cost in there too, isn't there, Matt?
Absolutely.
But the benefit is your phones, your laptops, your tablets, and everything are accessing the cloud, not your store. And one of the main reasons you might want to do this is if someone has access to that you don't want has access to your DVR system or anything else, could be the ATG in your store. A, they've got access to that service, but B, they can use that as an attack vector to hop to other aspects, other areas of your store. Potentially, you could jump from DVR system to attack the back office PC to then have access to the payments environment. So again, think about what traffic's flowing everywhere for multiple reasons. Not only data cost in this example, but also, hey, if someone could jump, if I don't have a DVR service and I'm not using VPNs to access my DVR, don't let everybody else have access to it, because they can hop from one to another, potentially. If you haven't got your back office PC up to date, it might have some exploits. People can utilize them to then automatically, hey, I'm on the back office PC, which means I've got access to the aspects of the point of sale environment. So lastly, we're going to talk about or provide an example of moving the ATG functionality. It's something people want to do all day, every day. There's a ton of online ATG services that are out there on offer, and they're really valuable. Why not automate having fuel delivered to your stores? Why have someone look at a printed out receipt and make a phone call to organize it? I mean, there's so many reasons why you want to get your ATGs online and access the data, the super useful data that they provide. Now, many ATGs are super old school, running serial. They can't be connected. So a lot of people have serial dongles that are plugged into their ATG that convert them to IP and then send the data or give IP access to the ATG. And that's done for convenience, and it's done for real business pains and real business reasons. But usually, certainly something we see a lot, is very similar to the DVR system. Once an ATG is online, it's left wide open to the internet for convenience, so people can get in. And just like the DVR, consider what that exposes your business as a jump point to the rest of the network. I mean, Matt, you guys must see this all the time as well. It's really common, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very much like the DVRs. Customers want to access that data from anywhere, and generally the rules request to be wide open. You can't restrict it to known source IP addresses.
I think moving the ATG to the cloud is almost a no-brainer. I really do. There's lots of online cloud services. You can build your own for your own organization if you want to. There's lots of folks that have these applications already running in the cloud, and it's offered more as a software as a service. The example that Matt gave earlier on, where you're absolving yourself of more responsibility than other things, and that online ATG cloud service needs to get data from the ATG, and you need to think about that. Some ATGs are waiting to be polled by the ATG cloud service, which means the application in the cloud needs to reach into your network. So there's issues with that. You might want to consider leveraging a VPN, and a lot of online ATG services have got this covered for you already. They'll form a VPN into your back office network so they can securely reach into the ATG. But also, if they don't, if it's in the cloud, you can have that firewall pinhole open to your ATG that only is allowing access from that ATG cloud service provider. So rather than it being open to the whole internet, it's just open to the ATG provider, which is a huge boost in security versus having it wide open. Plus,
Absolutely.
fixes a lot of business pains. Yeah. I mean, it just makes so much more sense, doesn't it, Matt?
Oh, from a security perspective, that is such a better position to be in. If you can restrict who can call into your network, that's much better than leaving it wide open. Exactly.
And unlike the DVR service, the ATG data is really small. So you're exceedingly unlikely to have any bill shock with an ATG service, unless potentially the ATG goes nuts and starts spamming itself. But even if it does, it's such small amounts of data that you're probably safe leaving this running on cellular. If you have a store that's stuck on cellular for a period of time due to a broadband outage, this is one of the almost no-brainer cloud monitoring systems that you should consider doing, I think. The other two, moving the back office computer just may be impossible due to regulations for good reason that the brands put upon you. And the DVR, it may just have too much of a traffic overhead if you really think it through. But the ATG doesn't have those same issues. It's a great type of service to move to the cloud. And again, it's not exposing you to your store to the internet. If you're wanting to access data about the ATGs, you're accessing the cloud service, which has its own inherent built-in security. And the chances are that's much more convenient for you too, because if you've got more than one store, you can see the whole lot in aggregate via the cloud service, rather than having to check one store after another.
Centralized security policy makes it much simpler.
Exactly. So those are the three examples we wanted to talk to you about. They look the same on paper. They both have different considerations. And our goal here is to really get you thinking about what services you're thinking of moving to the cloud and why, and the intricacies of doing so, and what unexpected problems they may bring up. So hopefully that's got you thinking. But another big thing to think about when you're moving to the cloud is identity and access management. Matt, why don't you explain for the folks what it is we mean about this and why it's really important?
Sure, Simon. So it's important to understand that regardless of the service that you're procuring from the cloud provider, all of them place the responsibility of user access on you. You are going to be responsible for determining who can access what systems in your cloud environment.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important to think about. So part of it is the cloud provider providing that for you. Are you responsible for it? Who's notifying the cloud provider when one of your employees leaves? One of the biggest problems that regarding identity and access management is people never update it. And so you've got people that still have access that haven't worked at your company for the last 3 years. Really think about that. And that's worse if it's in the cloud. It's a little different if you have to be in your network to get access to a system, but things in the cloud are conveniently accessible, which means you want to make sure who's got that convenient access.
Absolutely.
And employ multi-factor authentication. Oftentimes that's really easy with cloud providers. It's baked in. That's when, as well as a username and password, you've got usually a rolling 6-digit key using an application on your phone or a password manager. And that means if someone's got access to your username and password, they still can't get in because they don't have your MFA application on your phone. And frankly, that's good advice for every online service that you access. If it offers MFA, please turn it on. It makes a huge difference to security. You should do it with your banking, everything you've got access to. We also want you to think about network and data security in general. Hopefully this is becoming a self-evident slide or a self-evident piece of information based on what Matt and I have spoken about earlier and some of the examples we've given. But really think about the data and where it's going and how it gets there and what if someone could intercept it. Those are things that are really key to keeping your network secure, and they become more critical when you're in the cloud because it's more public than your own network. Matt, I know you've got some specific views on this and some great advice. Sure. What do you think people really need to be looking at in terms of network and data security for the cloud?
A lot of the communication that takes place in a corporate network and your own private network is not encrypted because you're on an trusted network and you're not exposing that to untrusted parties. When you move things to the cloud, you really need to consider, what am I sending across the public internet and what am I doing to protect that data? So you're going to want to employ encryption techniques, TLS, VPN, etc., to make sure that the data that you're passing is secure on the open public internet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, some of the examples we gave before. Think about the data flow. Think about what's talking where, and think about that traffic while it's in motion, and frankly, at rest.
Absolutely.
It all boils down to have a plan. Hopefully, this hasn't scared people off from moving to the cloud, but it just takes a bit of thought. Like anything worth doing, plan it out, think about it, consult with a professional. There's lots of organizations that do this all day, every day for a lot of their customers. Talk to them. They've got more experience than you because it's their job to do it. But at the end of the day, don't absolve yourself of responsibility. So think about what you're doing. Really think about backups and restoration. It's something we haven't touched on. A lot of cloud providers have that baked in, but what happens if the cloud provider dies? What happens if they go out of business? What happens if they're out of service for 2 weeks? How's that going to impact you? Have you got a migration plan? Can you jump from one provider to another quickly if you need to? Think that through as well.
Yeah, one topic came to mind this week, understanding who's connecting to your network as well. You may be allowing third parties some access to your cloud infrastructure. Think about if they get compromised, what's your plan for managing that? Do you cut them off? When do you cut them off? When do you restore them? Just something else to also consider in your plan.
Yeah, exactly. A DR plan. Cloud adds DR, but cloud's got to be part of your DR plan too if it's failing. So really think that through as well. So to summarize, think about it all. Weigh up all aspects of a migration, why you're doing it, what you're moving, what it needs to communicate with, who's accessing it, how you're backing it up. Think about them all before moving. You might find moving to the cloud's not for you. I think in today's modern world, moving to the cloud more often than not makes more sense. But for certain things, it just doesn't. So do your own homework. Don't be persuaded by someone trying to sell you on moving to the cloud. Make sure it's right for you, and really, really ensure that the responsibilities are clearly understood. Just like PCI in general that you're used to doing, you know who's responsible for what. Same applies to the cloud, whether there's payment data in it or not. If you understand who's responsible for what, it's just going to make life a lot easier in the long term for your business. And really clearly understand the security implications. That's kind of a subset of responsibilities, but just make sure you're not opening up a big hole by thinking things through properly. So that's
Matt,
my bits and pieces. Sorry, Mark, over to you.
That was very informative, fascinating, and I'm sure we've got some great questions lined up here. So, Matt, first question for you. So, I know you and I both are practitioners in this area. We've done quite a bit of work in the cloud, which is always pretty fun. But in that work, what would you find to be the biggest security challenge with cloud computing?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. In my mind, I keep getting stuck on user access, identity access and management. I think your security teams and your cloud providers are doing their part to make sure that the environment is secure. But if you don't properly manage user access, that's, in my mind, the biggest hole. An employee leaving the company who still has access to the systems could be a problem. An employee whose phone gets compromised and the user credentials are leaked out. Now you're giving access to somebody else. So staying on top of that user access to me is the biggest concern.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think right behind that, from what I've seen, is that we spend a ton of time working on endpoint tools and all these other security measures within our own organizations where we've got hands-on keyboards, which is really our biggest threat. And a lot of times those tools don't fit exactly the same into the cloud. So when you look at how you're monitoring and all that in the cloud, it also is pretty difficult. It's all different types of things that are used in the cloud for that. Simon, Ford predicts that in 2022, this is on their like big 5 prediction list for the years, that one of the major cloud providers could be compromised by a cyber attack. So how should cloud users prepare for that? Talking about things like multi-cloud.
Sure. Yeah, I think everybody should consider that it's possible at all times anyway. I think the biggest thing is offsite backups. We mentioned in the presentation, people need to make sure they're backing up data. Backup data offsite to a place that's not overwritten. People can do it at whatever frequency their business needs. I'd say do it at least once a week, probably going back at least 4 weeks. Maybe back it up to another cloud service provider. You can do that online or a dedicated service like Iron Mountain, for example. Another thing you can do to help out is host your services in multiple availability regions. So most cloud providers have, certainly in the US, East, Central, and West, for example. So don't just put your stuff in multiple zones in a single region. Put it on East Coast and West Coast. That's going to give you some backup, because the likelihood is if one of these bigger cloud service providers suffer a breach, hopefully it's not going to be the whole thing. So it might just be one region and you can navigate your way out of it that way. If it's worth it, it might be worth considering hosting a DR, disaster recovery, in a separate cloud provider. And that could either be hot, warm, or cold, depending on how quickly you want to spin it up and how much you want to pay to have that service sitting there. Lastly, I would say practice your DR plans. We do buy and twice a year practice of my company's disaster recovery plans. If you've got a DR plan, practice it, because sometimes it shows up that things that some of your assumptions don't actually work in practice. So don't let a major disaster be the time you discover that. So back stuff up and make sure it works.
All right, thanks for that, Simon. Like we're almost out of time here. Simon, there was one more question, and that was, are you in fact the voice of the Geico Gecko?
I am not the voice of the Geico Gecko. I'm from the other side of the world from the Geico Gecko.
Okay. Just making sure. All right. Thanks, guys. Great webinar. Great information. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate taking the time to listen to us.